Jephthah. The first judge of any importance after Gideon was Jephthah. He too fell short of being the ideal Jewish ruler. His father had married a woman of another tribe, an unusual occurrence in a time when a woman who left her tribe was held in contempt. Jephthah, the offspring of this union, had to bear the consequences of his mother's irregular conduct. So many annoyances were put on him as a half-breed that he was forced to leave his home and settle in a heathen district. At first, Jephthah refused to accept the rulership which the people offered him in an assembly at Mizpah, for he had not forgotten the wrongs to which he had been subjected. In the end, however, he yielded and placed himself at the head of the people in the war against Gatal, the king of the Ammonites. At his departure he vowed before God to sacrifice to him whatsoever first came out the doors of his house to meet him when he returned a victor from the war. God was angry and said, "So, Jephthah has vowed to offer to me the first thing that shall meet him. If a dog were the first thing to meet him, would a dog be a sacrifice to me? The vow will be visited on his firstborn, on his own offspring, his only daughter. But I will deliver my people, not for Jephthah's sake, but for the sake of the prayers of Israel." The first to meet him after his successful campaign was his daughter Shelah. Overwhelmed by anguish, the father cried out, "Rightly is the name Shelah, the one who is demanded, given to you, that you should be offered up as a sacrifice. Who will set my heart and soul in the balance to see which will bear the greater sorrow? But because I opened my mouth to the Lord and uttered a vow, I cannot take it back." Then Shelah spoke, saying, "Why do you grieve for my death, since the people were delivered? Do you not remember what happened in the day of our forefathers, when the father offered his son as a burnt offering, and the son did not refuse, but gladly consented, and the offerer and the offered were both full of joy? Therefore do as you have spoken. But before I die I will ask a favor. Grant me that I may go with my friends on the mountains, sojourn among the hills, and tread on the rocks to shed my tears, and deposit there the grief of my lost youth. The trees of the field will weep for me, and the beasts of the field mourn for me. I do not grieve for my death, nor because I have to yield up my life, but because when my father vowed this heedless vow, he did not have me in mind. I fear, therefore, that I may not be an acceptable sacrifice, and that my death shall be for nothing." Shelah and her companions then went and told the sages of the people her case, but none could give her any help. Then she went up to Mount Teleg, where the Lord appeared to her at night, saying, "I have closed the mouth of the sages of my people in this generation, so that they cannot answer you a word. But my vow will be fulfilled, and nothing remain undone. I know you to be wiser than your father and all the wise men, and now your soul will be accepted at your request, and your death shall be very precious before my face for all time." Shelah began to bewail her fate in these words, "Hear, you mountains, my lamentations, and you hills, see the tears of my eyes, and you rocks, testify to the weeping of my soul. My words will go up to heaven, and my tears will be written in the firmament. I have not been granted the joy of a wedding, nor was the wreath of my betrothal completed. I have not been decked with ornaments, nor have I been scented with myrrh and with aromatic perfumes. I have not been anointed with the oil that was prepared for me. Alas, O my mother, it was in vain that you gave birth to me, for the grave was destined to be my bridal chamber. The oil you prepared for me will be spilled, and the moth will eat the white garments my mother sewed for me. The bridal wreath my nurse wound for me will wither, and the worms will destroy my garments in blue and purple, and my companions will all their days lament over me. And now, you trees, incline your branches and weep over my youth. You beasts of the forest, come and trample on my virginity, for my years are cut off, and the days of my life grow old in darkness." Her lamentations were of as little avail as her arguments with her father. In vain she sought to prove to him from the Torah that the law speaks only of animal sacrifices, never of human sacrifices. In vain she cited the example of Jacob, who had vowed to give God a tenth of all the possessions he owned. and yet he did not attempt later to sacrifice one of his sons. But Jephthah was inexorable. All he would yield was a respite during which his daughter might visit various scholars, who were to decide whether he was bound by his vow. According to the Torah, his vow was entirely invalid. He was not even obliged to pay his daughter's value in money. But the scholars of his time had forgotten this halakha, and they decided that the vow must be kept. The forgetfulness of the scholars was brought by God, ordained as a punishment on Jephthah for having slaughtered thousands of Ephraim. Only one man was living at the time who, if he had been questioned about the case, would have been able to give a decision. This was the high priest Phinehas. But he said, "What? I, a high priest, the son of a high priest, should humiliate myself and go to an ignoramus?" Jephthah, on the other hand, said, "What? I, the chief of the tribes of Israel, the first prince of the land, should humiliate myself and go to one of the rank and file?" So it was the rivalry between Jephthah and Phinehas that caused the loss of a young life. Their punishment did not miss them. Jephthah died a horrible death. Limb by limb, his body was dismembered. As for the high priest, the Holy Spirit departed from him, and he had to give up his priestly dignity. As it had been Jephthah's work to ward off the Ammonites, so his successor Abdon was occupied with protecting Israel against the Moabites. The king of Moab sent a messenger to Abdon, and they spoke thus: "You know well that Israel took possessions of cities that belonged to me. Return them." Abdon's reply was, "Maybe you ought to think about how the Ammonites came out when they came against us." The measure of Moab's sins, it seems, caused them to fail, for they slew 45,000 of them and routed the rest. Samson. The last judge except one, Samson was not the most important of the judges, but he was the greatest warrior of the period, and, except Goliath, the greatest warrior of all times. He was the son of Manoah of the tribe of Dan, and his wife Zelalponanit of the tribe of Judah. He was born to them at a time when they were giving up all hope of having children. Samson's birth is a striking illustration of the short-sightedness of human beings. The judge Ibzan had not invited Manoah and Zelalponanit to any of the 120 feasts in honor of the marriage of his 60 children, which were celebrated at his house and at the house of their parents-in-law, because he thought that sterile she-mule would never be in a position to repay his courtesy. It turned out that Samson's parents were blessed with an extraordinary son, while Ibzan saw his 60 children die during his lifetime. Samson's strength was superhuman, and the dimensions of his body were gigantic. He measured 60 ells between the shoulders. Yet he had one imperfection: he was maimed in both feet. The first evidence of his gigantic strength he gave when he uprooted 2 great mountains and rubbed them against each other. Such feats he was able to perform as often as the Spirit of God poured over him. Whenever this happened, it was indicated by his hair. It began to move and emit a bell-like sound, which could be heard a long way off. Besides, while the Spirit rested on him, he was able to cover a distance equal to that between Zorah and Eshtaol, with one stride. As you recall, it was Samson's supernatural strength that made Jacob think that he would be the Messiah. When God showed him Samson's later end, it was then he realized that the new era would not be ushered in by the hero judge. Samson won his first victory over the Philistines by means of the jawbones of the ass on which Abraham had made his way to Mount Moriah. It had been preserved miraculously. Samson was at the point of dying from thirst when water began to flow from his own mouth as if from a spring. Besides physical prowess, Samson possessed also spiritual distinctions. He was unselfish to the last degree. He had been of great help to the Israelites, but he never asked the smallest service for himself. When Samson told Delilah that he was a Nazirite of God, she was certain that he had divulged the secret to his true strength. She knew his character too well to entertain the idea that he would couple the name of God with an untruth. There was a weak side to his character also. He allowed sensual pleasures to dominate him. The consequence was that he who went astray after his eyes lost his eyes. Even this severe punishment produced no change of heart. He continued to lead his old immoral life even in prison, and he was encouraged in this by the Philistines, who set aside all considerations of family purity in the hope of descendants who would be the equals of Samson in strength and stature. They used him as a stud bull. As throughout all his life, Samson had been given proofs of superhuman power, so also at the moment of his death. He begged God to realize in him the blessing of Jacob and endow him with divine strength. He died with these words on his lips: "O Master of the world, give me in this life a reward for the loss of one of my eyes," which was granted by his being included in the Holy Scriptures. "For the loss of the other, I will wait to be rewarded in the world to come." Even after his death, Samson was a shield to the Israelites. Fear of him had so cowed the Philistines that for 24 years they did not dare attack the Israelites. A part of the money which Delilah received from the Philistine lords as the price of Samson's secret she gave to her son Micah, and he used it to make an idol. This sin was even more unpardonable, as Micah owed his life to a miracle performed by Moses. It was during that time of the Egyptian oppression that if the prescribed number of bricks was not furnished by the Israelites, their children were used as building material. Such would have been Micah's fate if he had not been saved in a miraculous way. Moses wrote down the name of God and put the words on Micah's body. The dead boy came to life, and Moses drew him out of the wall of which he had been made a part. Micah did not show himself worthy of the wonder done for him. Even before the Israelites left Egypt, he made an idol, and it was he who fashioned the golden calf. At the time of Othniel, the judge, he took up his abode at a distance of not more than 3 miles from the sanctuary at Shiloh, and won over the grandson of Moses to officiate as priest before his idol. The sanctuary which Micah erected harbored various idols. He had 3 images of boys and 3 of calves, 1 lion, an eagle, a dragon, and a dove. When a man came who wanted a wife, he was directed to appeal to the dove. If riches were desired, he worshipped the eagle. For daughters, both to calves and the lion for strength, and to the dragon for long life. Sacrifices and incense alike were offered to these idols, and both had to be purchased with cash money from Micah, 7 pieces for a sacrifice and 1 for incense. The rapid degeneration of the family of Moses may be accounted for by the fact that Moses had married the daughter of a priest who had ministered to idols. Yet the grandson of Moses was not an idolater of ordinary caliber. His sinful conduct had the semblance of morality. From his grandfather he had heard the rule that a man should do avodah zarah for hire rather than be dependent on his fellow creatures. The meaning of avodah zarah here means strange, in the sense of unusual work. But he took the term in its ordinary use, as service of strange gods. So, far from being a wholehearted idolater, he adopted methods calculated to harm the cause of idol worship. Whenever anyone came leading an animal with the intention of sacrificing it, he would say, "What good can the idol do you? It can neither see nor speak nor hear." But, as he was concerned about his own livelihood and did not want to offend the idolaters too grossly, he would continue, "If you bring a dash of flour and a few eggs, it will suffice." This offering he would eat himself. Under David, he fulfilled the position of treasurer. David appointed him because he thought that a man who was willing to become a priest to an idol only in order to earn bread, and then repented, must be worthy of confidence. However sincere his repentance may have been, he relapsed into his former life when he was removed from his office by Solomon, who filled all positions with new incumbents at his ascension to the throne. Finally, he abandoned his idolatrous ways wholly, and became so pure a man that he was favored by God with the gift of prophecy. The mischief done by Micah spread further and further. Especially the Benjamites distinguished themselves for their zeal in paying homage to his idols. God therefore resolved to visit the sins of Israel and Benjamin on them. The opportunity was not long in coming, for it was then that the Benjamites committed the outrage of Gibeah. Before the house of Bethak, a venerable old man, they imitated the disgraceful conduct of the Sodomites before the house of Lot. When the other tribes exacted amends from the Benjamites and were denied satisfaction, bloody combats ensued. At first, the Benjamites prevailed, in spite of the fact that the Urim and Thummim questioned by Phinehas had encouraged the Israelites to take up the conflict, with the words, "Up to war, I shall deliver them into your hand." After the tribes had again and again suffered defeat, they recognized the intention of God to abandon them as punishment for their sins. They therefore ordained a day of fasting and convocation before the Holy Ark, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, entreated God in their behalf. "What is this that you lead us astray? Is the deed of the Benjamites right in your eyes? Then why did you not command us to desist from the combat? But if what our brethren has done is evil in your sight, then why do you cause us to fall before them in battle? O God of our fathers, hear my voice. Make it known to your servant whether the war waged with Benjamin is pleasing in your eyes, or whether you desire to punish your people for its sins. Then the sinners among us will amend their ways. I am mindful of what happened in the days of my youth, at the time of Moses. In the zeal of my soul I slew the man and woman for the sin of Zimri. And when his well-wishers sought to kill me, you sent an angel, who cut off 24,000 of them and delivered me. But now 11 of your tribes have gone forth to do your bidding, to avenge and slay the sinners. And look, they have themselves been slain, so that they are made to believe that your revelations are lying and deceitful. O Lord, God of our fathers, nothing is hidden from you. Make it understood why this misfortune has overtaken us." God replied to Phinehas at great length, setting forth why 11 tribes had suffered so heavily. The Lord had wanted to punish them for having permitted Micah and his mother Delilah to pursue their evil ways undisturbed. But the Benjamites were zealous beyond measure in avenging the wrong done to the woman at Gibeah. Now that all those had perished who were guilty of aiding and abetting Micah in his idolatrous practices, whether directly or indirectly, God was willing to help them in their conflicts with the Benjamites. So it came to pass. In the battle fought soon after, 75,000 Benjamites fell. Only 600 of the tribe survived. Fearing to remain in Palestine, the small band emigrated to Italy and Germany. At the same time, the punishment promised them by God overtook the 2 chief sinners. Micah lost his life by fire, and his mother rotted alive. Worms crawled from her body. In spite of the great mischief caused by Micah, he had one good quality, and God permitted it to plead for him when the angel stood up against him as his accuser. He was extremely hospitable. His house always stood open to the wanderer, and due to his hospitality he was granted a share in the future world. In hell, Micah is the first in the 6th division, which is under the guidance of the angel Hadriel. He is the only one in the division who was spared hell's tortures. Micah's son was Jeroboam, whose golden calves were sinful far beyond anything his father had done. In those days God spoke to Phinehas, "You are 120 years old. You have reached the natural term of man's life. Go now to the mountain Danaben, and remain there many years. I will command the eagles to sustain you with food. You will return to men at the time when you lock the clouds shut, and then open them again. Then I will carry you to the place where you will see those who went before you, and there you will wait till I visit the world, and bring you the taste of death." Elkanah and Hannah. The period of the judges is linked to the period of the kingdom by the prophet Samuel, who anointed both Saul and David as kings. Not only was Samuel himself a prophet, but his forebears had also been prophets, and both his parents, Elkanah and Hannah, were endowed with the gift of prophecy. Aside from this gift, Elkanah possessed extraordinary virtue. He was a second Abraham, the only pious man of his generation who saved the world from destruction, when God, made angry by the idolatry of Micah, was on the point of destroying it utterly. His chief merit was that he stimulated the people by his example to go on pilgrimages to Shiloh, the spiritual center of the nation. Accompanied by his whole household, including kinsmen, he was in the habit of making the 3 prescribed pilgrimages annually, and though he was a man of only moderate means, his retinue was equipped with great magnificence. In all the towns through which it passed, the procession caused commotion. The onlookers invariably inquired of the reason for the rare spectacle, and Elkanah told them, "We are going to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, for from there comes the law. Would you like to join us?" Such gentle, persuasive words did not fail to take effect. The first year, 5 households undertook the pilgrimage, the next year 10, and so on until the whole town followed his example. Elkanah chose a new route every year. Thus he touched at many towns, and their inhabitants were led to do a pious deed. In spite of his God-fearing ways, Elkanah's domestic life was not perfectly happy. He had been married 10 years, and his union with Hannah had not been blessed with offspring. The love he bore his wife compensated him for his childlessness, but Hannah herself insisted on his taking a second wife. This wife, Peninnah, embraced every opportunity of vexing Hannah. In the morning her derisive greeting to Hannah would be, "Are you getting your children ready for school?" Such jeers were to keep Hannah mindful of her childlessness. Perhaps Peninnah's intentions were laudable. She may have wanted to bring Hannah to the point of praying to God for children. However it may have come about, Hannah's petition for a son was fervent and devout. She entreated God, "Lord of the world, have you created anything in vain? Our eyes you made for sight, our ears for hearing, our mouth for speech, our nose to smell, our hands to work. Did you not create these breasts above my heart to give milk to a babe? Grant me a son, that he may draw nourishment from me. Lord, you reign over all things, the mortal and the heavenly beings. The heavenly beings neither eat nor drink. They do not propagate themselves, nor do they die, but they live forever. Mortal man eats, drinks, propagates his kind, and dies. If now I am of the heavenly beings, let me live forever. But if I belong to mortal mankind, let me do my part in establishing the race." Eli, the high priest, first misinterpreted Hannah's long prayer and dismissed her with the blessing, "May the son born to you acquire great knowledge in the law." Hannah left the sanctuary, and at once her grief-furrowed countenance changed. She felt beyond a doubt that the blessing of Eli would be fulfilled. The youth of Samuel. Hannah's prayer was heard. At the end of 6 months and a few days, Samuel was born, in the 19th year of her married life and the 130th year of her age. Samuel was of a frail constitution and required tender care and nurture. For this reason, he and his mother could not accompany Elkanah on his pilgrimages. Hannah held her boy back from the sanctuary for some years. Before Samuel's birth, a voice was heard from heaven that proclaimed that in a short time a great man would be born, whose name would be Samuel. Then all men children of that time were accordingly named Samuel. As they grew up, the mothers were in the habit of getting together and telling of their children's doings, in order to determine which of them satisfied the expectations of the prophecy. When the true Samuel was born, and by his wonderful deed excelled all his companions, it became plain to whom the word of God applied. His preeminence now being undisputed, Hannah was willing to part with him. The following incident is an illustration of Samuel's unusual qualities manifested even in infancy. He was 2 years old when his mother brought him to Shiloh to leave him there permanently. An occasion at once presented itself for the display of his learning and acumen, which were so great as to arouse the astonishment of the high priest Eli himself. On entering the sanctuary, Samuel noticed that they were seeking a priest to kill the sacrificial animal. Samuel instructed the attendants that a non-priest was permitted to kill the sacrifice. The high priest Eli appeared at the moment when, by Samuel's directions, the sacrifice was being killed by a non-priest. Angered by the child's boldness, he was about to have him executed, regardless of Hannah's prayer for his life. "Let him die," he said. "I shall pray for another in his place." Hannah replied, "I lend him to the Lord. Whatever besides, he belongs neither to you nor to me, but to God." Eli agreed. Only then, after Samuel's life was secure, Hannah offered up her prayer of thanksgiving. Besides the expression of her gratitude, it contained also many prophecies regarding Samuel's future achievements, and it recited the history of Israel from the beginning until the advent of the Messiah. Her prayer incidentally brought relief to the sons of Korah. Since the earth had swallowed them, they had been constantly sinking lower and lower. When Hannah uttered the words, "God brings down to Sheol and brings up," they came to a standstill in their downward course. Hannah was also granted to witness not only the greatness of her son, but also the undoing of her rival. Every time Hannah bore a child, Peninnah lost 2 of hers, until 8 of her 10 children had died, and she would have had to surrender all had not Hannah interceded for her with prayer. Eli and his sons. Shortly before Samuel entered on his novitiate in the sanctuary, Eli succeeded to the 3 highest offices in the land. He was made high priest, president of the Sanhedrin, and ruler over the political affairs of Israel. Eli was a pious man, and devoted to the study of the Torah. Therefore he attained a good old age and high honors. In his office as high priest, he was successor to no less a personage than Phinehas, who had lost his high priestly dignity on account of his haughty bearing toward Jephthah. With Eli, the line of Ithamar rose to power instead of the line of Eleazar. However, the iniquitous deeds of his 2 sons brought dire misfortune on Eli and his family. The sons of Eli transgressed only in that they sometimes kept the women waiting who came to the sanctuary to bring purification offerings, and so they retarded their return to their families. This was bad enough for a priest of God, although some said they did more than that with the women, and there was controversy over what was ultimately inscribed in the Holy Scriptures. Their misdeeds recoiled on their father, who was not strict enough in rebuking them. Eli's punishment was that he aged prematurely, and besides he had to give up his various offices. During his lifetime, his youngest son Phinehas, the worthier of the 2, officiated as high priest. The only reproach to which Phinehas laid himself open was that he made no attempt to mend his brother's ways. The worst of God's decree against Eli he learned from Elkanah, the man of God who came to Eli and who announced that the priestly dignity would be wrested from his house, and once more confirmed on the family of Eleazar, and furthermore, his descendants would all die in their prime. The latter doom can be averted by good deeds, devotion in prayer, and zealous study of the Torah. These means were often employed successfully, but against the loss of the high priest's office there is no specific cure. The house of Eli forfeited it irrevocably. Abiathar, the great-grandson of Eli's son Phinehas, the last of the high priests of the line of Ithamar, had to submit to the fate of seeing David transfer his dignity to Zadok, in whose family it remained forever. The sons of Eli brought great misfortune also on the whole of Israel. To their sins, and the ease with which the people condoned them, was attributed the unhappy outcome of the war with the Philistines. The Holy Ark, the receptacle for the broken table of the law, which accompanied the people to the camp, did not have the expected effect of compelling victory for the Israelites. What Eli feared happened. He told his sons that he did not want to see them again if the ark was captured and they should survive. But the ark was lost, and they did not survive. They died on the battlefield on which their nation had suffered a bitter defeat. The Philistines, to be sure, had to pay dearly for their victory, especially those who had spoken contemptuous words when the Holy Ark had appeared in the Israelite camp. They said, The God of the Israelites had 10 plagues, and those he extended on the Egyptians. He no longer has it in his power to do harm. But God said, "Wait and see. I shall bring plagues down on you, the like of which has never been seen." This new plague consisted in mice crawling forth out of the earth and jerking the entrails out of the bodies of the Philistines while they eased nature. If the Philistines sought to protect themselves by using brass vessels, the vessels burst at the touch of the mice, and, as before, the Philistines were at their mercy. After some months of suffering, when they realized that their god Dagon was the victim instead of the victor, they resolved to send the ark back to the Israelites. When the holy ark was thus brought back into the Israelite domain, there was exceeding great rejoicing. Yet the people were lacking in due reverence. They unloaded the holy vessel while doing their usual work. God punished them severely. The 70 members of the Sanhedrin perished, and with them 50,000 of the people. The punishment was also given for another reason. At first sight of the ark, some of the people had exclaimed, "Who do you suppose vexed those that now bring back the ark? And who has mollified them now?" As if they didn't know. Next, the activities of Samuel. End part 76 of 95, TheLegendsOfTheJews.com.